Welcome to Angelo's Tennis Rackets Edition, and I want to talk about the four rackets, the only four rackets that I used in the last 30 years, and a couple more that I dabbled with. I will talk about, and I'm gonna start with the latest one. The latest one was right here. It's a 2014 model. It's the Wilson Pro Staff 95. And I'd say the reason, if you haven't used this racket, I've tried a lot of rackets. This is one of the best rackets I've ever played with. It has a certain feel to it, and particularly for a one-handed backhand, but really two-handed, one-handed doesn't matter. It's really good for the slice as well, especially the forehand slice. And this is the 95 version. The 100, I played with the 100 light version as well before when I was much lighter. And that racket, you can really whip that thing around. I mean, you're talking about, you hit a forehand slice on the run, man, you'll shock some people. You could do that with this racket too, but that 100L. And, people would think maybe, I'd use this because of Federer. It's not. The reason I use this racket really is because of Alexander Dolgopolov.
It's amazing. Damn. That's crazy.
That was crazy.
This is the racket that he used to use. I believe it's the same one in 95. Maybe he made some changes to it, but it has I don't know if this makes a difference, but it has this amply feel, enhanced feel technology, braided graphite and Kevlar. And I don't know, maybe that's what it is that makes it feel so good. And I'm going to talk about another racket that also has a really good feel here, which is the second racket that I used previous, and the racket previous to this, which I'll put up on the screen because I no longer have, which is the Yonex RQIS Tour. And it's a red and black racket. And I used to use the light version. It was a 95. It was a 95 head, 95 square inch head. It's 295 grams. They also had a heavier version, which back then I didn't. I played with it before. I may have owned one. I'm not sure. But I like the light version because I could customize it. I could add weight to it the way I wanted to add weight to it. And it was the same. It's the same racket as the heavier version, but it had a lot more power. You could really whip that thing around. And I guess the technology that they called was the carbon nanotube, I think is what it was called. And if you cut the racket open, it had this tube, plastic tube inside. And I guess that's what they're referring to, this nanotube. I actually have one here. This is an RQIS Tour 2. I painted it, customized it here because I paid like 20 bucks for it. And this one was white and red, I believe, but not this racket's not usable. I never liked it. I just bought it for fun, painted it, added a bunch of weight to it, and this thing is a sledgehammer now. I broke the strings here. I used it forever, just as like a practice racket. And speaking of sledgehammers, sometimes I like to do this with rackets. This is a sledgehammer right here. And it looks ugly, okay? But this is a 95, or this might be a 100L of that version, the Wilson Pro Staff. And I cracked it. And I weighed this thing down. This is a true sledgehammer. It's painted. It's got tape all over it. It's got a bunch of metal in here. This thing probably weighs like 375 grams at least. And that thing can pound some tennis balls. If you haven't tried that before, I would give it a try, because it's actually not that heavy, and it really feels good. But back to the racket. So before I get into the last two, some rackets that I dabbled with that I really liked. The Babolat Pure Drive. The Rodic one, not the Rodic one with the extra ½ inch, but just the Pure Drive Rodic that came out, I guess it was like back in the early 2000s, maybe 2005, something like that. I had one of these, and I really like it for the two-handed backhand and the serve, just the way it is, you know, not customized at all. And I just didn't really like it for the one-hander, which I used my one-hand backhand a lot back then. And I actually had one of these, and I gave it to my ex-girlfriend, which is a mistake, because she broke up with me and took the racket. She wouldn't give it back. And I'm not buying another one as of now. But that racket is in my opinion, these three rackets are three of the best rackets of all time. And I've also got into head. I've been at clubs that sponsored Babolat, or that sold Babolats. I've been at clubs, working at clubs that sold head rackets. I used to use occasionally the head Radical, not the one that Agassi used, but the micro gel. I think that racket still might be for sale and new for $100. That is a classic there, the Radical Micro Gel. And then there was the UTech, I believe it's called the UTech rackets. I like those a lot, the Prestige. I actually, some of these rackets I would never actually buy back then, but I would find them. Like I found a Prestige, a brand new UTech Prestige on a court, and I used that for a while before I sold it. Back then I was a lightweight, so I really didn't. It was a pro. I think it was a pro version, so it was just too heavy for me back then. Being as light as I was. But those are some of the rackets that I've dabbled with that I really like, particularly that Babolat Pure Drive. I like the Pure Drive over the Arrow. The Arrow is not a bad racket, especially if it's got some more weight to it, some added weight to it. But I really like the Pure Drive. Is one of my all-time favorites, especially for feel and just the way it feels. And speaking of feel, if you haven't seen my video on strings, I do prefer Kevlar synthetic gut string setup. So, all these rackets, add some Kevlar synthetic gut in them, and it really feels good. So, some of the older models, when I first started playing tennis, the club that I was at was a Prince. It was a Prince club, and this guy sold Prince demos. So my first racket that I ever had, this one I actually got from a sporting goods store, was a Prince Thunderlite. And I used that racket for a couple years, and it was the 100, I believe it was the 100 head size, 100 square inch head size. It was light. Can't even remember how great of a racket it was, but that's the racket I chose back then. I really enjoyed it. And then I went to a Prince, I believe it was the Moore line. I can't remember. I was been trying to look them up. I think it was the Moore Response. It was either the Moore Control, Moore Response, something like that. It was a bronze. It was bronze on this side, and then it was blue on this side. And that was probably a 100 square inch racket, mid-size weight. I don't remember exactly. And I used to use these crappy nylon strings. Don't ask me why. I think this was before I strung rackets, or I just started stringing rackets, and I was getting these cheap strings for nothing. And if you ever want some really cheap, crappy strings, try nylon out. They'll never break. But yeah, that was a racket. I really like that racket too. If I look back now, those two Prince rackets really don't compare to the Yonex or the Babolat or the Wilson or the head rackets at all. I would never use them again, although I think rackets are completely overrated. If you ask me, this Wilson, I could use this for the rest of my life, or that Babolat. I don't need any new technology, new rackets that are out there. You know, for the most part, if you're a regular player, you're probably going to break rackets, or they, you know, I used to scuff these up and was lazy and never replaced the grommets. So I put holes, especially that Yonex, because I really used those. I was really playing a lot when I used that RQIS tour. And I used to burn holes here, and it pretty much cracks the racket. And you know, you go through a couple rackets a year that way. So that's my story on rackets. Let me know down in the comments if there's any new rackets. I would love to try some new rackets that are out right now. I see Yonex has some really cool colors that I want to check out. I did try some Yonex rackets after the one that I had. I never really found anything I liked, but I haven't really tried any of the newer ones the last 5 to 7 years. So hope you enjoy this and have a great day.